Dumela Sabona, welcome to Express Lunch with me, Palisa, right here on ANN7 TV, first, fast and live. You are welcome. You are watching channel 405 on your DSTV channel. And the message is loud and clear. Nullified structures not to vote in the elective conference and Bojanala Free State and KZN structures will stay as observers. There will be no radical economic transformation if there is no economic development. And Finance Minister Malusi also says RT cannot be achieved by marginalizing the private sector. And the question is whether it is right to make RT dependent on economic growth.
Chairman, one last question.
Yeah.
Is there any bitterness because of the court action and some few PECs not being able to attend?
No, there's no bitterness.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
ANC Gauteng chair assures the nation there is no bitterness over the PECs left out from the conference. And KZN and Free State PECs have been nullified by the courts. President Jacob Zuma announces that the government will subsidize free higher education for poor and working class students. And the president says the definition of poor and working class students will now refer to currently enrolled TVET colleges or university students with a combined household annual income of up to 350,000 rands by the 2018 academic year. And addressing the media ahead of the media briefing on special NEC outgoing Secretary General Gwede Mantashe provided clarity on status of voting delegates from nullified PECs.
The structures that are nullified will not be voting delegates at conference. Okay, there will not be the delegates to conference. We're not going to try any idea that will actually contaminate conference. Branches that are cited in cases both in the Free State and Bojanala will not vote at conference. Will not even allow them to vote with a different color code. They will not vote. Finished registration, we are now at the tail end registering Tswane. Yeah, we are registering Tswane. Every province has been registered. Every region has been registered. We are now registering Tswane. And we said instead of putting pressure on everybody, we'll start at 2. We'll start the conference at 2 so that we don't put undue pressure on everybody running around, have a conference, we can't even adopt credentials. We want to table the credentials up front to conference. That is where we are. That's why it says I will go somewhere else, I will go to the registration center again to check if things are still on track. That's what we do. We want to run a good conference.
That is nothing but chauvinism. Uma uzofika usibuza ukuthi usbanibani ushade nobani.
And addressing the media ahead of the media briefing on special NEC, outgoing Secretary General Gwede Mantashe provided clarity on status of voting delegates from nullified PECs. Now, addressing the media ahead of the media briefing again on special NEC, outgoing Secretary General Gwede Mantashe provided clarity, yes, on status of voting delegates from nullified PECs. And this follows 2 major provincial executive committees facing the wrath of courts. And on Friday, the Provincial Elective Conference of KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State were declared unlawful. And what it means is that the 27 PEC leaders from each of these provinces won't be able to cast their votes. And ANC stalwart Tokyo Sekwale, or rather Sekwale, says he comes to the conference with a heavy heart and he hopes that leaders will put aside their power struggles and put the people of South Africa first.
I am
extremely concerned that this conference goes well. I've attended many ANC conferences from the time of Oliver Tambo being on the NEC. I'm not on the NEC now because we're defeated in Mangaung by the current leadership. We're given 5 years to hold this organization together, but we're scared at what may happen or what may not happen in this conference. And over the last 5 years and more, people have been talking corruption, 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 corruption. What this thing means is proof today, is proof that before you can corrupt the SOE, you must corrupt the ANC. Okay? We are seeing now the result of corrupted processes, procedures and systems of the ANC itself. Because if a branch should have met on time, and you corrupt that process by making sure that it doesn't correct, if delegates should have been properly elected and you corrupted that system, the result is going to be people disgruntled and fighting outside there. And if they don't get an answer from the provinces or from national, they will go where the law is, in the highest law decision-making authorities of the country, not of the organization.
And yes, of course, this is the crunch week that we've all been waiting for. And of course, in our studio in Nasrec, we are having Ubuntu and of course, the other anchors there that are definitely waiting for you. Let's go live to Nasrec.
Well, you are back in Nasrec, where we've just had a press conference hosted by the Secretary General, the SG, and of course there's only one SG in this country, Gwede Mantashe, where he was telling us about the outcome of their discussions surrounding the small matter of the branches that have been implicated in court matters, and that where there's been a judgment, they have been nullified by court, then that will not happen. This includes not only the PECs, of course, there are also some branches which did not hold their BGMs, branch general meetings, and therefore their credentials would be in doubt. And of course, we know 96 of those people, all of those delegates had already arrived here, and we're going to participate, as Zizi Kodwa, national spokesperson, told us in the morning. And we also understand that just now, a few moments ago, there were two groups confronting each other outside, and we got some visuals of that. And Nomusa, our reporter, is outside, and she witnessed that event. Is it there?
And good day to our viewers. Indeed, what we saw just a while ago, delegates from the ANC Women's League as well as delegates from the Eastern Cape. It started off with the delegates from the Eastern Cape singing songs in favor of Cyril Ramaphosa, regardless of the preaching by the ANC NEC that those songs, those kind of songs, will not be tolerated in this particular conference. They had made it clear a number of times that factional songs are not allowed in this conference. Hence also the regalia that has names of their preferred candidates was also not allowed in this particular conference. But also we saw the Women's League coming as well, singing songs that are in favor of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. However, that had to end a short while ago. Now going back to all these, those that have been nullified, or the branches as well as the PEC structures that have been nullified by court, Gwede Mantashe, the outgoing Secretary General of the African National Congress, has made it clear that those that are implicated in court judgments will not be participating as voting delegates in the conference. However, they will be there as observers. He also mentioned that not only the leadership will only be voted, but also there are other matters that need voting. Those delegates will also not be voting on those matters. So basically, they won't have any voting rights at all, either for policy adoption or any other matter that needs voting on here at the conference. However, they will still participate as observers. Now, just to take you a little bit back on who exactly are those delegates that have been implicated. Yesterday, we saw a day of court for the ANC here. We saw that in the KZN, the PEC was nullified, which gives you 27 PEC members that cannot participate in their capacity as Provincial Executive Committee. However, we understand that there are some of the PEC members that had already been accredited or that had been elected by their branches to come and participate as branch delegates. I understand at some point when we engaged Mtumseni Ntuli, who is the spokesperson, as well as Super Zuma, they mentioned, who is the secretary in KZN, they mentioned that they had been elected by their branches as delegate number 1. So therefore, whether the PEC is nullified or not, they will still come to Nasrec and participate as branch delegates. Furthermore, we move on to Bujanala, where the 38 branches have also been nullified because they could not sit proper BGMs that led to them electing delegates to come to this conference. Subsequently, the court saying that those BGMs are nullified because they did not follow the guidelines of the African National Congress. They did not parade particularly, so therefore they can't participate in this conference. So those ones, we can say roughly about 37 delegates. And also we look at the Free State as well. Besides the PEC of 27 members, there are also branches that were highlighted by the judge yesterday that cannot participate in this particular conference because also they could not parade in their BGMs, and therefore they can't have a right to send a delegation here because that delegation wouldn't have been elected in a proper manner or under the guidelines of the African National Congress. So now if we look at it, it's roughly above 100 delegates that have been now stripped of their voting rights in this particular conference. And I understand and I can hear behind me the singing has started again, and we can see that delegates are very excited. They are very anxious to participate as well as elect their preferred candidates. As we had the Eastern Cape, there was singing songs in favor of Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC Women's League singing songs in favor of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. We await to see Buntu and Kiorapet that on Sunday who will lead the African National Congress.
My dear colleague Nomusa Pungula, they're breaking the situation down following the press conference and, of course, announcement of some that will not be voting. Something that is clearly, Pabalo Pasha, going to upset people.
Well, surely, earlier on I was just highlighting this factor to my colleagues that after the president speaks, the SG is going to give an official announcement of credentials. And it is at that particular setting where the pronouncement of the NEC can be rejected. So we cannot just say that, it's final. Some of these PC members will not participate. What happens if plenary decides that they must participate? Because remember, it's a national conference of the ANC, not necessarily a conference of the NEC. So things might change. We'll just have to watch the space.
Warisam, what do you think, Jackie?
Yeah, of course. I tend to agree with Papan in terms of the process or the procedure. That, of course, the president will have to give the political report as the political head of the ANC nationally. And then, in fact, prior to that, it will be the Secretary General to give the organizational report in terms of the processing administratively and so on and so forth. And then the House, the delegates, then have the liberty, to either adopt credentials so that this becomes a properly constituted conference of the ANC. And if the credentials are not adopted because of these problems surrounding certain delegates that have since been disqualified, then obviously they will need time to further iron out those differences. But what is also interesting is that you have people who have been nominated at branch level who also happened to serve at PEC level. So even though you may want to disqualify them coming in as leaders, but they are still branch delegates nominated by their branches, so you cannot take away their voting status in a properly constituted conference. But it's quite worrying. And I seem to think that there has been a week-long, massive, well-orchestrated psychological onslaught in terms of the court findings throughout the week. And I think this was well-planned, well-timed, that on the eve, this is the last kick, the killer punch, to just psychologically defeat. And we cannot lie and say that that psychological onslaught has not set in somehow to say what is happening here. But we also do know that nominations and so on and so forth are one thing, but delegates and how they vote is what is really going to matter.
Now, before we actually continue, let me just take this time to just introduce our panel to our esteemed viewers that might have just joined us. To my immediate right is Papano Pasha, who's a political analyst. Just next to her is Sifiso Mahlangu, our group head of politics. And we also have Jackie Shandu, political analyst, here with us at our Nasdaq studios. But we do have joining us at our Midrand studios, Udo Freers, who is an independent political analyst. Now, Sifiso, just to get your opinion on this, what do you think about the numbers and about perhaps the plenary floor actually rejecting the NEC's decision?
Well, I've been studying the ANC for a while, and I've been looking into their credentials and credibility dialogue for a while. I've attended enough press conferences addressed by Mr. Gwede Mantashe, and if that man knows how to do anything, it's to montage a story. By tonight, what he presented may be an entirely different saga. And I say this with the greatest of respect because the plenary might throw this suggestion out. When we were here for the policy conference, Mr. Jonah Chitenza came and misled the nation and misled the media to say the caucus had agreed that white monopoly capital does not exist, and that was not true. So this might be a way perhaps to neutralize the nation into something that the NEC has not divulged in. My assessment is this. The NEC at this point in time is separated. There is a CR camp, there is an NDZ camp within the NEC. There was no way that the likes of Mr. Msebenzi Zwane were going to allow this to happen. Mr. Supra Mahumapili was going to allow this to happen. So this might not be necessarily true. We'll hear how it is later. Though, even if these individuals don't vote as PC members, they'll vote as members of the branch. However, on the other hand, this just means that these are 6 people or 8. What about the others who were simply sent as delegates, or the others who simply represent the PC? It means that perhaps between 40 to 70 people who would have potentially voted for NDZ will not be voting. That's an onslaught. That's an assault on her voter margin, because at this point everyone needs votes. This is the sort of contest where a person can win by 10 votes or 20 votes or 60 votes. We know that the Veterans League is more likely to vote with CR, but the Youth League and the Women's League are more likely to vote with NDZ. So it's going to be a tough race. It's going to go down to the wire. However, Mr. Mabuza will come through to endorse whom the next president of the ANC is. I believe at this point in time, we should hold our horses because the plenary has not met. What we can expect is that there's going to be a fiasco with issues of credentials. People are going to ask, I'm a delegate, who declares that I cannot vote? And others are going to say, if you do vote, then it renders this conference null and void. So there's going to be that animosity, there's going to be that altercation in the plenaries that the ANC is going into at this point.
Well, I did mention that we do have Udo Freers, who's in our Midrand studios. Just to get you into this conversation, what are your thoughts on the decision that has been announced as being from the NEC by Gwede Mantashe? And do you think that perhaps the plenary might reject it or accept it?
What's happening?
Well, a very good afternoon, Mr. Udo Freers. You are coming to us live from our studios in Midrand, Johannesburg. What we were just asking is that based on the statement by Secretary General of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, he says that he was speaking on behalf of the NEC to say that all of those delegates who were part of meetings, whether it was branch general meetings or PGCs that were declared null and void, will be allowed to attend the conference but not be allowed to actually cast a vote. Now, when that gets put to the plenary in the plenary session, do you think that the floor will accept or reject that matter? And what is your general analysis of the situation?
The general observation, in my view, is this, that first of all, I need to say good day and thank you very much for having me here today. Hope the viewers are there and viewing and listening nicely. For me, we all have our own opinions and we all have our own observations, so therefore We are entitled to it. We're living in a democracy. That's my first statement here. The judiciary's judgment on the democratic political participation, as is the case in the Free State and in KwaZulu, is actually anti-democratic and therefore, in my view, illegitimate. Given the history of South Africa's judiciary of old, it surely is not a good reflection on the judiciary to get involved in politics and for politicians to then take this on with the judiciary and go for their own colleagues, their own comrades, to me is opportunistic, and it will backfire because people see it, they see through it, that there's some kind of gerrymandering, if you want, for want of a better word. There's something cooking here that people do not like. And it's very clear that the people will eventually know more about it, and then it'll backfire. It's not going to be very good for the judiciary to carry on like this. And I think those politicians who opportunistically turn to the judiciary and the judges, who are equally ambitious and ego-driven, they should watch it, because it'll backfire into their face too. There's no way that politicians try and be self-righteous, go to the judiciary for help, and then get it. There's something very wrong here. And it's anti-democratic by definition.
Now, Mr. Udo there was just talking about how that he feels that some of the people who might feel disgruntled or not really accept the NEC's decision could actually run to the courts at this matter to actually try and vent their anger or frustrations and use the judiciary to try and actually force the hand of the ANC. Now, Jackie, I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that even during the conference we might see people still trying to file applications and stop things from flowing?
I don't think so. I think that the ANC has fully realized the very potent, very grave danger of internal political problems being escalated outside the ANC to be presided, adjudicated upon by courts, by judges, you know. And sometimes this happens, oftentimes actually, without members exhausting internal structures and mechanisms that already exist inside the ANC to deal with issues of dissatisfaction, people feeling that they've been mistreated or, you know, they've been unfairly dealt with and so on and so forth. So, and I think that part of these resolutions, I heard the national spokesperson of the ANC a few days ago also insisting that they are going to take quite a strong decision moving forward in terms of how they deal with members who are so quick to leave the ANC and run to the courts. Because there is also a feeling, one gets the sense that there is a feeling, of course, we don't expect many in the ANC, especially in the high echelons of leadership, to come out and say, actually, we don't trust that the courts are impartial, neutral, and unbiased in their judgments of cases that have to do with ANC internal battles, you know. But you do get that sense that there is that frustration to say, you know, it cannot be, because also it seems that courts have been ruling in one particular direction, you know, almost at the expense of one particular candidate, particularly Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. If you look at the court cases and the rulings in the past couple of days, it does raise eyebrows, you know. So I heard the national spokesperson saying that they're going to take quite strong decisions, that this is what should happen to members that do not even come through, speak to leadership, exhaust those structures of the ANC that exist to deal with such issues, and quickly run to courts to put the organization into disrepute. It's not good publicity for the ANC to see comrades. And you always see the media reports, ANC versus ANC.
Yes.
You know? So it doesn't send a good message. It actually speaks of an organization somewhat at war with itself. It must come to an end. It is a practice, if me listening closely, that many are saying we must nip it in the bud before it spirals out of control.
I hear you, Jackie, but let me just come to Papana. You know, in the same breath, the ANC national spokesperson said this morning that sometimes the judiciary is actually correct in calling out the ANC, but also the ANC also has to take some introspection time to actually see whether or not it's implementing its own policies. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Look, before I even answer the question or that question, what is happening now is that branch delegates are actually meeting, and there are various caucuses. And what is clear is that I think reading, because remember, conferences, or in terms of the election itself, is going to be about numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, I think what's happening now is the CR17 camp is anticipating that Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is going to emerge. And I'll tell you why. When the Mpumalanga numbers, or the delegates, the unity numbers, when you include the unity numbers, surely Nkosazana is going to emerge. But now what happens is that with the decision that the NEC has taken in relation to the court findings, it means that if Nkosazana emerges, you can then start, casting aspersion on the credibility and the integrity of the conference itself in relation to the delegates who actually voted for Nkosazana Zuma. So what I am preempting is that post-conference, when Nkosazana emerges, we are going to see litigations, litigation after litigation, where the conference itself is going to be contested. I think, as Professor Matebula had indicated earlier on, what these comrades, in particular those who come from NUM, what they have perfected is the art of litigation, as a war, as an instrument of war. I think they envisaged what was going to happen, and they used this process to ensure that it works, on their behalf. Will it work in the conference itself? I don't think so. What will happen post-conference, that's another matter altogether. But if, and as I'm predicting, when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma emerges, we are going to see a litany of court cases.
And of course, sorry, just for a moment there, we have Udo Froze, who is in our studios in Midrand, who would like to be part of this conversation. We're not leaving you alone. I don't know what you are hearing, Mr. Froze, but do tell us your opinion on this difficult matter.
And that in post-1994 South Africa, beyond apartheid, this seems to be part of a hidden agenda. Whose agenda is being hidden here? And who are these so-called leaders, these undemocratic leaders who tolerate these hidden agendas, and at what price? Now, will the ANC be split into two? And who will be running the opposition ANC? Will there be another COPE, another Achang, or any of those Mickey Mouse parties? Let's see what's panning out. Thank you.
Pose a question there for you. Papan actually mentioned something about the fact that she just preempts some post-conference litigation. Do you also foresee something similar?
Indeed, I expect something similar, that there will be litigation processes. The main body of the ANC will almost cease to exist. This is all done in preparation to the 2019 elections coming up. So this is the first step, and then we'll see what happens between 2018 and 2019 elections. And then we'll find out, hopefully eventually the hidden hands and the hidden agendas will come out, and hopefully people will be courageous enough to address those and see what they can get to protect their own turf and to protect themselves against hidden agendas, which is very dangerous, because that also means the general public out there is not able to vote the way they want to be voting. They will not have any say in the economy because a hidden agenda has its own interests and has its own hitmen and hitwomen to make sure that they will keep what they have so that the economy will be inaccessible and closed. And that should not be happening.
Mr. Froze there speaking to us from our studios in Midrand. Sfiso Matlango, I mean, if you're looking at this has just put the conference on knife's edge. Can't be a particularly responsible decision from one quarter, and another could think that it places an advantage for their candidate of choice. But really now, when we talk court cases, even those who are being denied now the right to vote when they are already here, wouldn't those people actually just litigate right away?
It is only a miracle that can be found in a Pentecostal church that can prevent this, prevent this conference from being legally interdicted. I think in any way, whoever the winner is, there'll be a court ruling after that. There's going to be an attempt to litigate in some shape or form. However, I think there is a possibility that the conference can go ahead and the ANC elects a leader. but it will not be without the high drama that is evident here today. And it is simply because this policy conference, which this also is, it's not just an elective conference, it's also a policy conference because many, many policies of the ANC will be adopted here. In fact, this is the only conference that can adopt any policy of the ANC. According to the constitution of the ANC, policy recommendations must be sent 6 months in advance. That's why there must be 6 months between the policy conference and the national elective conference. So this is the adoption conference. So all of those policies on free education, radical economic transformation, nationalization, if there should be and will be adopted at this conference. I think the only challenge at this point is that all of our attention is on who the president will be, and we are overlooking the policy debate that should be governing this conference. When a leader of the ANC takes office, they don't just take office to then have carte blanche and do what they want. They must abide by the conference and the policies adopted at conference, which to me should signify that whether NDZ or CR17 are sent to the seat, they should advance on the ethos and the methods and the policies of radical economic transformation. I, however, am very doubtful that this will present itself like in any other conference, because no other person in the ANC throughout many years has attempted to bring or redefine a policy that was not introduced at the policy conference. Mr. Ramaphosa has brought about the New Deal. Mr. Mantashe told me that the New Deal is not different to RET. And then I asked, so is it RET by another name? So he said, well, I'm not a linguist, but it's not very different from RET. But when you study, and I've read a few documents relating to the New Deal, it's an American formula that has sort of been synchronized into the South African economy.
Mr. Matangu, let me just ask you to hold that thought right there. We have to cross over to our reporter, Valerie Robinson, who's actually situated where earlier on two different ANC factions were booing each other. Valerie, a very good afternoon to you. Just talk to us regarding who exactly was booing who, what the songs that were being chanted mean, if you have a translation for us.
Good afternoon once again to you, Kyo, back in the studio. Yes, things have calmed down here. It is actually lunchtime here at Gallagher, and delegates have been making their way through the doors to the Nazareth eating hall where they will be having lunch, as I said. There are groups, if I can ask my cameraman to pan behind me, there are groups that are being addressed by leaders across the Nazareth Centre in big clumps. Things have calmed down, the singing and dancing has stopped as everyone makes their way to go have lunch. We're expecting the opening address by President Jacob Zuma to start shortly after that. We aren't exactly sure who these factions were that were confronting each other, as the media are still barred from entering the general area where the delegates are, but we will be escorted there after lunchtime, just before the opening will begin. Now, following the announcement that the NEC is going to abide to the judicial processes of the court and keep excluding those PEC and branch members that are in contest, that are being contested. We didn't really see a negative reaction outside. We actually saw a whole bunch of people singing and dancing, a lot of joy and an upbeat atmosphere. So at this stage, apart from a few interactions that took place here a few moments ago, there hasn't really been any conflict or indication of any conflict, but we do know that this is affecting a lot of delegates. We're not quite sure of the exact number of branch members and PEC members that will not be able to vote and what kind of effect that will have. But obviously we're thinking that it's going to have a blow to the Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma camp, as those were the provinces that were really backing her at the stage.
Larry Robinson, there, our colleague, speaking to us about the earlier conflict tensions that she observed taking place between two groups, this in reaction to the announcement by the SG during the press conference that some of the nullified branches and PECs won't be participating, something we are discussing and trying to break down what its implications are. But I would like to think with our guests who are here, of course, I've got Jackie Shandu there, and I have Sifiso Mahlangu and Papalo Pasha here, whether perhaps the NDZ camp won't be bolstered by the announcement earlier that, free education for students from poorer families. Would that really add some oomph to their enthusiasm today?
No, absolutely correct. In fact, perhaps the one implication that we did not touch on is how the banks and the rest of the finance institutions, as well as private education providers, are obviously hurt by this kind of announcement. Because in a capitalist, predatory capitalist society like South Africa, we've gone to a point where we've accepted, wrongly so, that everything is a commodity. Everything, water, education. So this attempt by President Zuma actually to say education is a fundamental human right, but it is also part of those socio-economic rights enshrined in the Constitution, particularly in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, that we cannot always have a market approach. There are certain things that are just non-market in their nature, and they not need to be seen as something that can be bought or sold. So we do know that the nature of South African capital is so predatory that they want to sell everything and they always overcharge on everything. So to come back to your question though, you see part of the logic of this new deal thing is part of that complete commodification, complete privatization, where anything and everything and anybody and everybody is up for sale.
Mr. Shandu, hold that thought. I wish they were here to speak for themselves, something I hope in due course they'll make themselves available. We have our colleague Masi Shaba Dlamini outside there. She is mixing it up with the people as she's seeing delegates. She is stationed strategically to observe what's happening outside, and she has an update for us. Masi Shaba. Masi Shaba, I hope you are hearing me. What is happening where you are right now?
Greetings to you and to our viewers. Currently, we are standing where we can see delegates behind me. The delegates are currently just gathering themselves. We did see earlier on that there was some sort of a briefing towards the delegates. So we're still not sure as to what exactly this briefing was about, because we are not allowed to be interacting with the delegates. So the delegates at the moment are still meeting. The conference is set to kick off at 2, which is the plenary session. The plenary session will also be open up to the media just to find out as to what exactly the delegates can expect going into the conference, when what will be happening, and how these delegates will then go on to choose their next leader for the ruling party at the moment.
Ms. Chaba, have you heard any singing of songs, any chanting of slogans from where you were standing? Could you perhaps hear any lyrics of what the delegates are singing at the moment?
We did actually hear some chanting of songs and dancing, and funny enough, there was people that were singing and singing CR17 songs. And as soon as they saw the Women's League coming up, they started booing the Women's League, and it was some sort of altercation that was taking on there, but it was just merely in song and in dance, nothing physical, nothing in bad spirit, just two people saying, we are for NDZ, we are for Cyril Ramaphosa, and let us go to the polls, let us see who we elect, and let us see who comes out triumphant after this. The person that will be actually going forward after the 10-year rule of President Jacob Zuma.
Actually, strategically around the Nasrec Expo Center, but as she mentioned to us earlier on, she's a bit barred from accessing the delegates right now, but she was able to see that some delegates are meeting for probably mini caucuses like Papan actually mentioned to us earlier on this morning.
I think it's interesting that we sit here discussing the plenaries and they have no video footage inside. They have no access to media. They've shut down all communication devices. They don't take their cell phones into the commissions. And it's only Mr. Zizi Kodwa and Mr. Gwede Mantashe who walk and come here and address the media. And the delegates have no idea what Mr. Mantashe and Zizi Kodwa have just said. And they perpetuate a narrative. There's been a discredit in those people who would vote for NDZ, and that story goes viral. At some point in the day, the delegates will have to go and sleep, finding out that the numbers for NDZ have gone down. That's propaganda at its purest, because then you believe, well, I can't back a losing horse. You know, let me make myself available or amenable, to be swayed to another side. That's the whole discussion on Chapter 4 of the policy debate that is called the Battle of Ideas. So I think it's a whole propaganda scheme that's going on at the moment. Though I think Mr. Gwede Mantashe has every right to be on a slate as a chairperson. But I doubt how credibly he can run this contest, how credibly he can run this conference, knowing that he is the first secretary and the last secretary of the ANC, but he is pushing for a faction. I think the integrity of this, for me, is untoward because it cannot be fair. This outcome has been biased.
Let me just ask you to hold that thought there. Out of sight is not out of mind. We still do have Udo Vroos, who is in our Midrand studios. Udo, just weigh in on the conversation here. I mean, we're having delegates booing each other openly, even though they were told not to wear T-shirts that represent a particular faction and not to sing songs that are a specific nominee specific rather, but just to sing ANC generic songs. What do you have to say about those things that are happening this morning?
I'd like to know the hidden agendas, and I'd like to know who's behind it and who's funding that, because the ANC is known to be a very disciplined movement countrywide and even beyond. The ANC's history shows actually that the movement suffered most after the late President Nelson Mandela had actually retired, under recalled former President Thabo Mbeki and later the incumbent Jacob Zuma. It's been undermined and discredited, hammered into submission into the ground, weakened and exposed to Afro-pessimism. Everywhere you can go, everybody had anything bad to say about the ANC, became popular and famous, knocking Zuma, knocking the ANC. So there is certainly an agenda, and that needs to be addressed. And it's actually the glue of the ANC is not only leadership anymore, it's now shifted to the voters. And the voters actually the majority of the voters actually keep the ANC together because they are proud and they identify with it. I think that is a big thing to keep in mind. And then my last question here would be, what is the role of Kgalema Motlanthe now? What is he busy forming a new party like COPE? Is he going to split away, or is he going to lead the new split party from the ANC now, say by Monday, Tuesday this coming week? We should watch Kgalema Motlanthe.
Mr. Uda, does this actually confirm the disunity that we've been seeing in provinces, within the ANC?
Your opinion on this, and I'm getting...
Are you perhaps maybe suggesting that...
If there could be a hidden agenda, wouldn't that really be a dangerous thing to say? Because it could mean that some people may want to actually collapse a conference. Isn't perhaps that speculation a little dangerous?
And it's been raised quite a few times. In fact, I wrote about it about a month ago in the Sunday Independent, where we have pointed these pitfalls out. And it's very, very difficult to handle that if you're not have a united front within the ANC leadership and the PECs and the NECs and the National Working Committee. They should all stand together. The Women's League, the Youth League, the war veterans, they should all be coming together and actually address it. They should address it now before it's too late.
partner seems to disagree with you. I saw her shaking her head earlier on regarding the issue of Kgalema Motlanthe perhaps starting off a new party. You know, he says we should watch what he's doing.
Well, not that I did not get that. No, but look, I wanted to answer. You had indicated that is it dangerous to pursue this speculation? It's not a speculation. It's a fact. Derek Honeycomb was on Twitter yesterday saying that if Cyril does not win, they must do everything to ensure that they collapse the conference itself. But over and above that, I think what is more dangerous is how in the run-up towards the election itself, the credibility of Nkosazana, has been dealt with. Because what this tells you is that you've got a few individuals who have no problem with polarizing society. Because remember, when you start, casting aspersion on your own comrades, people are going to question the ANC itself and not those individuals. So even now, what we are seeing is that, based on what Sifiso was articulating, when Nkosazana Dlamini wins, it means that society must have this perception that she won based on, flawed processes. So that's what we are seeing. But I think what is more dangerous is that if you looked at the previous judgment by the courts in KZ and in relation to the PEC, the NEC took a decision that the PEC itself must continue and the case itself will be appealed. Now you have a situation a day before the conference or, before the conference actually starts.
Hours.
Yes, they come back and say that no, the executive is, it's nullified, has been disbanded, or, whatever way you look at it. So I think these are tricks which are very dangerous, and they are not in the spirit of unity. Now, in relation to Kgalema, I think everything is possible. And it's sad. I mean, if you look at the former SG, he's currently consulting for the Brandhurst Foundation.
Right.
A foundation which is actually funded by the Oppenheimers. That should tell you a lot. That should actually tell you the crisis that the ANC finds itself in. That should not also confuse you in relation to Malusi Gigaba, when he was saying, or when he was, pursuing, some sort of analysis which seeks to say that there's no money. It tells you that the ANC at the moment is very much conflicted. I would not know if Kgalema would start a party, but I would not put it past him since he has joined the Oppenheimers. Everything is possible.
But can I ask you a question here? I think tensions are escalating, by the way. I think there's an unscheduled press conference that might take place a few moments from now, and hopefully we will be there and we'll be able to bring it to you. And maybe it could be another group that's unhappy and disgruntled about what just transpired. But also, the ANC is a broad church. We keep saying that. And we see all these diverse and very complex interests in the party. Perhaps this is also an opportunity for clear ideological basis for the ANC. Would that be a correct thing to say?
I think ideology is important, and I think Mr. Jackie Shandu is still to speak on ideology. He's a PhD candidate after all. Ideology is a good thing.
Should join the EFF. They're getting PhDs left, right, and center.
Vested interest is very important in ideology because it helps the argument and the battle of ideas. And then you draw a consensus and you feed off one another's wisdom. And that's very, very important. But in this country, it has not just been a battle of ideas. There has been a narrative that is set that President Jacob Zuma is making way for his wife or ex-wife. And this woman is not someone who has enough caliber to run for the presidency. And for that matter, the secondary, who in this case is Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, should be elected. And they've reintroduced things that the ANC never did, such as tradition and culture outside of the ANC's constitution. But just as a teaching on history, on the history of the ANC, Mr. Williams, when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma was appointed by former President Nelson Mandela as the Minister of Home Affairs, the Minister of Health in the first place, President Jacob Zuma was a mere MEC of Economic Development in KZN. His ex-wife at the time was already a minister. Turnout 2017, people think this man is now creating a way for someone who has no political credibility. When he was struggling as an MEC of KZN, this woman was already a minister of health. So who was up first in Calibre? Who was up first in the political front? Who sat in cabinet before the other? But so those things are not articulated in this country when people want to drive a narrative to say people are opening, holes for the narrative of their exes to enter. I think if people are gifted, and this woman surely has shown credibility, trusted in countries outside of this country, give her an equal spate. And if for that matter, someone is conniving, the collapse of these PECs, it's very, very unfortunate because they needed to have a great race with Mr. Ramaphosa and the winner will win the race. But it won't be a fair race if there's all of these instruments and ingredients to collapse.
Things going on, right?
If
I think yes, actually.
Please, because I think this is a crucial issue that Siso raises, that seemingly as a society we just don't know how to deal with this grave scourge of patriarchy and misogyny. Because this question of who is romantically linked to who, in the main, only affects women. I am yet to hear of a situation where two people are lovers, partners, husband and wife, or whatever the case may be, and it is brought up, right, to question the credibility, the suitability, the eligibility of a male person wanting to go and lead, wanting to get whatever position. So South Africa, we have this, and also, I mean, you look at the rape statistics, you look at the prevalence of abuse against, violence against women and children. It tells you this is a society that has not been able to deal with how the two sexes, the two genders, should relate in a non-violent, peaceful, non-harmful, non-threatening fashion. And it continues to. So these behavioral patterns, this should also be part of the discussions. We cannot continue to be the rape capital of the South African women, black women in particular, are among the most unsafe in the world, not just on the continent. It can't be business as usual. And if this sitting here was a conference, a festival of ideas, as it should have been, it would not be so much centered around which slate, which faction, who emerges. These would be the pressing issues of this country that I think warrant really very peculiar, careful attention. How do we zoom in into this? How do we take drastic measures to say this scourge, even in terms of the PR of the country? It is known. I have some friends who come from the rest of the continent and beyond. And one of the first concerns is, where are we safe? And this should be part of the discussions here.
This might be a bad question, but I'm going to have to ask. In the run-up to these elections, to this day, everyone has been talking about the ANC perhaps self-correcting. So maybe the existence of factions isn't entirely a bad idea. It is the ANC and its members making a decision about the future of the party. So self-correction could be those that will leave the party and do their own thing, and the party will remain the ANC.
I would agree if infections were based, as Swiss was saying earlier, on policy outlook, on ideology, on ideas. Now, these factions, more often than not, are based on personalities.
And winner takes all.
And winner takes all. I have spoken to some people I know who are voting delegates. Some of them are leading structures of the ANC or ANC Youth League in various regions and provinces. And just reasoning with them, are you individually, personally, intellectually, morally, politically opposed to the principle and the framework of radical economic transformation? And the answer you get says, no. So then how do you not support a candidate that advances that? And then the response becomes very personal, you see. So how personalities sort of trump ideas, is this is the big mystery that perhaps the ANC needs to spend more time unpacking. How is it that people are able to align themselves even to people that they know? This particular person advances policies and ideas that are anti-black, anti-poor, that are not going to help us. In fact, they are going to reproduce these inequalities, but they still align themselves with those people.
Before we settle this one, I think we have someone who can make a contribution in studio in Midrand, Mr. Udo Froze. Mr. Froze, I was just asking here that, the question of the ANC self-correcting. Everyone's been saying that, but I don't know what that means. I don't know if you have any ideas how they can manage that.
We say the ideology is a form of discipline and gives direction. That's how it is perceived. But here's a danger too. Emotional clashes and emotive claptrap create actually the divorce. They create a certain kind of polarization, which makes it very difficult then to govern. So it's a form of divide and rule. Again, where do those judges fit into? South Africa's judiciary needs to be addressed, as well as the media ownership. If these things keep being ignored, they'll create havoc in society. And remember, money creates mercenaries and swings elections. Those checkbook political leaders are dangerous and can grow actually into warlords. And they're opportunistic on all levels, and they're soulless people. You must watch out for those people. I'm warning against that. For example, countries such as Lesotho, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo are examples. And the ANC was exposed since 1990 to 2017, even today, to infiltrators. This whole situation has come about through infiltration on all levels, from the Bantustan governments, from the national government when the Nationalist Party collapsed into the ANC. You have a very dangerous and volatile situation that has developed since 1990 here in this country. And it can explode any time from now. I think the ANC, particularly the people on the ground, are aware and will not actually be able to be drawn into such kind of clashes and that we could see in countries even such as Somalia. Thank you.
Just come back to our studio. Sepapana, what are your thoughts on self-correction? Can you say that factionism is an example of self-correction? Is it part of the process of ANC fixing itself?
I think that analogy is not scientific. For example, in engineering, they've got what they call the stress and strain test. If you put any object into too much stress, eventually it will break in and give in. Now, you see, that there's another perhaps analysis that we should be able to, or maybe push forward, or maybe to look at. If you look at the ANC, and perhaps we give the ANC too much credit, if you look at the ideas of the ANC in the main for the past 30 years or 35 years, they've mainly been produced by the SACP or the South African Communist Party. If you look, for example, at your strategy and tactics, if you look at the national, or what is deemed the National Democratic Revolution, the state itself, the contradictions within the state and its society, those have been developed by the SACP. Now, what needs to happen? The ANC deems itself a liberation movement. By default, it's a political party because it contests elections. Now, if you look at a liberation movement or a revolutionary movement, it cannot be mass-based. The ANC at the moment is currently sitting with more than 600 or 700 members. Some of them, they have not been vetted. Some of them, they came in post-1998 or 2000, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. But now the question is, do they equally understand and aspire to what the ANC seeks to achieve? Another example is your NUM and the SACP. No, not the SACP, the NUM and COSATU, sorry. NUM and COSATU, they became part of the ANC post-unbanning. So now the question has to be, do they fully aspire or do they fully identify with what the ANC seeks to achieve, which is liberating society? But over and above that, what is this broad church? If we speak of ideas, what is that idea? We know that the ANC seeks to liberate society, but the ANC speaks about, it says it wants to achieve a national democratic society. It does not even explain what that stands for. So I think at an opportune moment, ANC members, and I'm talking about cadres now, they must be able to, to sit and actually reflect if whether the ANC is going where it ought to go. If you look at the Communist Party of China, they've got what they call the Politburo, which takes decisive decisions on behalf of, society. But within the context of the ANC, you've got everyone taking decisions. If the ANC is a real leader of society, it cannot continue operating in such a manner. Because a leader of society does not, even though it consults, it takes decision, it reflects, it takes decision, strategic and tactical, then it takes those decisions. In the instance of the ANC, it's a confused organization which must actually reflect on its confused status. Because really, you cannot have aspirant capitalists and those ones who are, who own some of the means of production contesting with people who talk about RET. That's a recipe for disaster because then you are talking about contradictions. Remember, if you talk about contradictions, and I always refer to antagonistic and non-antagonistic contradictions, capital and labor or the left cannot find each other. They cannot reconcile. So that's where you are finding the ANC. It's in a periphery, it's in a cul-de-sac, and if it does not come out of this, it's bound, it's in other instances, they say that, it's in a state, or it's bound to be in a state of entropy. So, I think the conference itself will give an indication of where the ANC is going. If Cyril wins, which I don't think is going to happen, I think there's going to be a revolution, which perhaps would be what many ordinary South Africans have been waiting for, because surely he would implement neoliberal policies. He would be able to, bring forth some of these conglomerates who are, by the way, going to be the people who are the ones who are, developing ANC policies. When Nkosazana emerges, that's when we would see perhaps a different ANC. Because as my colleague here was saying, if you look at her credential, it speaks for itself. As Fiso has indicated, in terms of governance, there's nothing that you can necessarily fault her for. So I think you've got a grouping of two people, and we'll see what happens. But it's a decider for me as far as I'm concerned. And if the CR17 camp loses, and if they do, and some of them decide to go outside of the ANC, I think I will actually say good riddance.
Well, we have our guest, dear viewer, here, breaking down the concept of the ANC self-correcting that everyone has been mentioning without breaking down. And Sfiso Mahlangu here, our group political editor at NN7 and TNA, he chuckled when the Pabalo Pasha here, my guest, said that, what is this broad church? Why did you chuckle? I mean, you sort of, your interest peaked, didn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So you like the idea of breaking down the broad church?
I'm all about church, as you know.
Do you have a definition for this broad church?
I think the broad church broke down when there seems to be pathological challenges in policy. And the SACP didn't support free education. And
communists,
but they're communists in this country. Mm-hmm. And COSATU did not back up when our reporters were harassed on the streets, and reporters of the New Age and NN7 were just the working class, and there was no defense mechanism from the workers. And all of these things were just brought by people who should be defending the policies they stand for. Part of the working class today, COSATU, has backed Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who many believe is the employer. So you've got the working class sort of defending capitalism, and that doesn't make any Marxist sense. It makes no political science sense. And I think the broad church is broken today because of many deferring policies that have been brought in. ASGISA did not work. The Associated Shared Growth Initiative of South Africa. GIPSA did not work. GIE did not work because it was not radical. It was speaking of, collective growth and how to grow the economy whilst bringing in everyone to participate in the economy. You cannot talk about everyone participating in the economy when black people are still outside. You cannot speak about that until there is land redistribution. And those things were not spoken of. So it was not radical. Now we've got another economic policy, radical economic transformation geared by the ANC. Mr. Ramaphosa introduces the New Deal, a symptom of what was introduced by the President of America in 1921. 3 years later, the New Deal collapsed in the US. If the New Deal collapsed in the US and you try and reprint it for South Africa with our dynamics, with our poverty and inequality, it would never work here. It's a recipe for disaster. So the change and the differing views on issues of policy, I believe, have really broken the church. We've got something called the National Development Plan, which in writing is very good.
Vision 2030. Let's just cross over to one of our reporters, Patisa Mfuyo, who is stationed somewhere in the Nasrec Expo Center. Patisa, good afternoon to you. Just let the viewers know where you're stationed and what updates you have for us from where you are.
Well, we're just outside the media center here at Nasrec with delegates. I'll just quickly move out of shot so that you can see. Delegates are going on lunch at the moment. We saw a few of them gathering in numbers where you'd expect that they were deliberating as to what's next that they will be doing here today. But now everyone is all scattered before they start at 2 o'clock. Remember that the SG announced today that the conference will start at 2. They were busy verifying delegates, checking if everyone who's here is supposed to be here. So that process, I'm sure it's finished by now, because by then it was only Tshwane that was left. So the conference is supposed to start at 2 o'clock, not at 9 as the program was saying. So we're waiting for them to see where this will go. But talking to various people as we were waiting outside, I know I spoke to Colin Maine from the ANC Youth League, saying that no matter what, they know that their candidate, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, will be making that address come the 20th of December. On the other side, I spoke to Mluleki Ndobe, who said, yes, as KZN, as much as they had the setback of the court case, but they are confident that they will still rally behind Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and they are confident that she will succeed come the 20th. So they were busy getting delegates to ensure that everyone is here to vote. Remember, with them, the PEC will not be voting, hence they're coming here as delegates. But on the other side of it, I spoke to Tokyo Sehwale, who actually voiced concerns, saying that he's quite disappointed as to what has been happening within the ANC. He says now it's no longer ANC of the people, but ANC of corruption. He says that he hopes that whatever happens inside here at the Nasrec halls, that the politicians will put their egos aside and put the people of South Africa first, because whatever happens within this conference, it will have an impact on 2019. Of course, he didn't want to predict what will happen in 2019. He says he hopes that the ANC will come together after this conference to ensure that they bring the people of South Africa together. He did speak about unity as well, saying yes, unity doesn't exist, but it's something that exists politically. So he hopes that the members of the ANC that are here, they will not forget that. They will put unity first to bring South Africa together. He said he was quite sad about the state of affairs as to what has been happening in the country for the past 5 years. So various politicians are voicing their concerns as to what has been happening. Now, going back to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, it looks like things are not looking into a favor, especially now with the PECs that will not be voting. But how much will that impact her election? I guess we'll find out once the counting is done. Of course, we know KwaZulu-Natal, with the Youth League as well in KwaZulu-Natal, they said that they want voting to be done manually. So they don't want voting to be done electronically. So we will see if that will also happen, if voting will be done manually. Because they said whatever happens in KwaZulu-Natal with the PGC, they're not sure if it was deliberate or it was an honest mistake. So hence they're saying that with manual counting, everyone will be there to monitor those accounting to ensure that there are no discrepancies once the results are announced. So we will wait for 2 o'clock and wait for the conference to commence here at Nasrec as delegates now are getting ready to go inside.
Patisamfuyo, there are reporters standing outside trying to assess emotion and reaction to what the SG said earlier. But here are some of the reactions we had to it earlier.
We finished registration. We are now at the tail end registering Tswane. Yeah, we are registering Tswane. Every province has been registered. Every region has been registered. We are now registering Tswane. And we said, instead of putting pressure on everybody, we'll start at 2. We'll start the conference at 2. So that we don't put undue pressure on everybody running around, have a conference, we can't even adopt credentials. We want to table the credentials up front to conference. That is where we are. That's why it says, I will go somewhere else, I'll go to the registration center again to check if things are still on track. That's what we do. We want to run a good conference. All the structures that are nullified will not be voting delegates at conference. Okay, there will not be the delegates to conference. We're not going to try any idea that will actually contaminate conference. Branches that are cited in cases both in the Free State and Bujanala will not vote at conference. Will not even allow them to vote with a different color code. They will not vote.
So I would say yes, from Morogoro to now, I think this is a period where one can say we have challenges almost similar to Morogoro, where the ANC can collapse unless we pull it together. But there's a lot of determination from all the leaders that we will cross this bridge.
It's possible to pull it together?
Yeah.
And what happens if you can't?
No, we have to.
What happens if you can't?
We have to.
Chairman, one last question.
Yeah.
Is there any bitterness because of the court action and some few PCs not being able to attend?
No, there's no bitterness.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I am extremely concerned that this conference goes well. I've attended many ANC conferences from the time of Oliver Tambo being on the NEC. I'm not on the NEC now because we're defeated in Mangau by the current leadership. We're given 5 years to hold this organization together, but we're scared at what may happen or what may not happen at this conference. And over the last 5 years and more, people have been talking corruption. What this thing means is proof today, is proof that before you can corrupt the SOE, you must corrupt the ANC. Okay? We are seeing now the result of corrupted processes, procedures and systems of the ANC itself. Because if a branch should have met on time and you corrupt that process by making sure that it doesn't correct, if delegates should have been properly elected and you corrupted that system, the result is going to be people disgruntled and fighting outside there. And if they don't get an answer from the provinces or from national, they will go where the law is, in the highest law decision-making authorities of the country, not of the organization. And that's where the constitution comes in. We are praying that things don't fall apart. We are concerned. I've never come to a conference of the ANC feeling internally the way I feel, and I don't think I'm an exception. Even people who are not members of the ANC are wondering, what now? Because you're the governing party. I would want to believe that if reason prevails, people may find one another. I'm not in the NEC. I'm a nobody. I've just come here as a former member, as a former NEC member, but a member of the ANC. So we gave others a chance. We defeated at Mangau. We sat back. So give them a chance to do what they did. It has been disappointing. That is why we are in this mess, in this rot where we are. Because it does seem we're concerned about who, as the Germans would say in 1933, the Führer, who should be the leader, and no longer concerned about the people. I hope those who are elected will remind themselves and need to be reminded that we are not bosses of the people, but we are the servants. I hope this conference will come out with that resolution. Politically, there is something called unity, but technically, when you are voting, it's a spoiled vote. So the question is, where will those spoiled votes go? It's a sad thing when a person or a group of persons have got the final say about what should happen at the conference of the ANC. It's a conference of delegates, but it's going to be a conference of so-and-so holding so many numbers, this one holding those numbers. That's exactly where the processes have been corrupted in the ANC. Now we're concerned what will happen. It is unfortunate, but we hope the best will happen for this organization.
Earlier on this morning, we still do have our panelists in studio here in Nasrec, as well as in our studio in Midrand. Now, just earlier on, before we listen to those bites, there was talk about SACP, its role as a communist party, and whether or not their actions really are reflecting of their communism. I just want to go to you, Mr. Udo. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the allegations that the SACP was giving certain delegates so-called pocket money to actually dissuade them from being bribed? What's your comment on that?
They just reduced themselves to Mickey Mouse status, showing that they have got no confidence in themselves. That means the SACP has become now, and this is the final straw that broke the camel's back, the SACP has become redundant. It's gone, it's bye-bye. It has its highlights, and those were the days. Let's move on, we don't need the SACP at all. And to address the self-correction, I think it's important to do away with the ETO system and do away with it immediately and not be soft on this one. And also what is important in addition to that is to directly address the secret sunset clauses which further divide and mismanage the nation of South Africa. This is dangerous. The ANC sits on the sunset clauses, has never thrown them out to the open to debate. And under self-correction, does the ANC honestly need agents provocateurs, infiltrators, arrogant and confused public commentators misrepresenting the ANC from every single platform? Why does the ANC allow a confusing opposition using its logos, songs, dance, clenched fist salute? Isn't this plagiarism? Isn't this an act of crime? To confuse the elders in the townships and the rural areas to get their votes? I think that's very crucial to address as well. Then you marginalize the agent provocateurs and the many people within the ANC who do not belong there.
Well, some have said, Mr. Froese, that this could well be an attempt to buy people out of voting, basically buying the soul of the ANC. I see you speak in quite strong terms. Do you agree?
It's wrong to buy the vote. As I mentioned earlier in this conversation, money swings the votes. Money influences, therefore, elections. And that makes it very, very difficult to handle an election because you don't know who you have. It's this opportunism without leadership, because if leadership takes money, or so-called leadership takes money, then we have nothing. That excludes the majority of the population to vote properly and get their things done, because nothing can be done if there's money involved. It's very unfair and very anti-democratic.
Just taking the conversation back to our studios here in Nasrec, what are your thoughts on this, the undemocraticness of vote buying?
Well, undemocraticness, is it democratic? Well, the question now becomes, how does the SACP, which is, because remember, the SACP, they don't have voting rights in the conference. I mean, why would they want to give delegates money? What is the intention? I had, they were saying that no, they don't want delegates to be bought, hence they're giving them money. Are they not themselves buying these delegates? You know, and I think that's where if that's where the confusion is, and because these are people who are part of the alliance. Now it just tells you of the bankruptcy and the paralysis within the alliance itself, where ordinary branch ANC members are given money. Are they hungry? Perhaps they are, but why would you give them money only when they go to a conference? Why have they not been taking care of branch delegates? Surely they would want to influence, the SACP would want to influence elective outcomes. It's a side indictment. Well, I hope that those delegates, they took that money, because if they really needed the money, it means that they didn't have it. They should take the money, but they should use their own consciousness, to decide whom they actually want to vote for. Not this leftist who speak left but walk right. I mean, if it's 5,000 per delegate, how much did they actually have? Remember the last conference of the SACP, they had actually declared that the SACP did not have money. So where did this money come from? Did it come from the sitters, where Blade was seconded, and where it was shown that he had deployed his friends and cronies? So I think, this is the challenge that the ANC is faced with, and this challenge is a challenge of patronage. It's a challenge where you see the likes of Tokyo Sehwale, who are so bitter and very angry that now they are not also eating, because in the ANC, it seems ANC leaders only speak out if they're not eating. When they start eating, they keep quiet, they support you. When they're outside, that's when they start seeing that things are going wrong. And it's very sad, and it means that ordinary South Africans must be able to look at this shenanigans and deceit for what they are, just political maneuvering.
But I see when people are upset because they fell out of the trial, but amongst other things, it seems to be really undermining the effort that some people, some of the candidates have put over the past year into winning votes, going around the country. You're talking to people, addressing people, and earning their trust, taking them into their confidence. Do you believe, Mr. Shandu, that it actually undermines the fact that people put in a lot of effort to acquire these votes?
No, absolutely. It's a complete onslaught on the core ethos of democracy, and just using money. And I think my fellow panelist is correct. Often it is taxpayers' money to usurp, wrongly take power away from those who should be exercising it according to the dictates of their own minds, their own conscience. But you are exploiting their situation of social, economic disenfranchisement and vulnerability, right? Because these people know the average delegate, voting delegate here, is an unemployed young person from Khayelitsha, from Tofimvama, from Cato Manor in Durban. So these are the people who first brought the ANC into power in 1994 and have brought it back to power consecutively 5 times. But these are the same people that the ANC has been very sluggish, non-committal, very ambiguous when it comes to meeting the needs of these people. And it's quite, when you look at it very closely, it escapes, it defies logic. How it happens that the ANC knows that the backbone of its electoral victories is the poor, the marginalized, the working class. Yet, when it assumes office, it exercises power on behalf of capital. To be precise, white monopoly capital that exploits the very same people that vote for the ANC. So, different people that bring the ANC to power, but it serves another master, a master that oppresses the same people that reach out to the ANC and say, we think you can liberate us. We think that you can break these chains to which capital ties us to. This should be part of the major theme of the conversation. I mean, it's quite shocking that Mr. Ramaphosa presided over some commission, some study on the labor question and the minimum wage that resolved that there should be a universal minimum wage of, I think, 20 rands per hour, if I'm not mistaken, which does absolutely nothing in terms of addressing, because in South Africa we often speak of the scourge of unemployment, that too many people are unemployed, many of whom are even unemployable because they're not skilled and so on and so forth. We rarely touch on the equally bad scourge of the employed poor, that more than 50% of the workforce even itself survives on more or less $1 a day, and they cannot meet just the basic needs of shelter, of transportation. Studies also tell us that more often than not, especially with the poor, more than half of their salaries goes towards transport, because you stay in Soweto, but you work as a bartender or a waiter in Fourways or in Midrand, and you're spending so much time and so much money in transit to and fro work, and those little, very meager resources are exhausted there. We want to come out of these commissions. How do we subsidize transportation? We've just had a shocking fuel price hike, and you know what? It's going to disproportionately affect the poor. How? Because the cost of transportation, both transporting commuters, both transporting goods, and those costs are always passed on. Capital never picks up the tab. The employers are not in the position, and it's very unethical that when there's an economic meltdown, it's the same capitalists who are first to demand the states to bail them out. And there's this notion that they are too big to fail. The very same authors of the meltdown that often happen, the periodic capitalist crises, you know? So we need to have a very candid conversation, plain speech, frank speech, unintimidated speech, that South African capitalism, even in terms of international capitalist standard, is spoiled rotten. In fact, I recall, even that's how Ivan Jim at some point characterized it. It's a capitalist clique that is special across global standards because it has so much leeway, you know, because it bulldozes, it coerces, you know, it manipulates in the main politicians. It's also problematic. Too many NEC members of the ANC sit as non-executive directors of the very same JSE listed companies. We have just been told that roughly 2% of the JSE is in black hands, you know? So this is what we speak about, these unethical relations that obviously militate against the advancement of radical economic transformation. You had someone, lastly, you had someone like Sipho Pichana, who's a chairperson of Anglo, coming up with something called Save South Africa. You know, yes. And a very belligerent puppet of monopoly.
We will talk about this, and I am sure he would like to avail himself so he can speak for himself, answer for himself, because we have to give him a right of reply if we do attack or have anyone attacking him. Well, you're still watching ANN7 from Nasrec, and we'll be back after this short break.